Hello and welcome to my presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brittany Bandur and I'm a math and science teacher. The topic I chose for my research this class was how can curriculum better serve the needs of Aboriginal students. A quick outline of my presentation, I'll go over a brief history of the First Nations education in Canada, and I'll establish why there is a need for change in how we do things in our classroom now for our Aboriginal students. I'll talk a little bit about the Aboriginal ways of knowing versus Euro-Canadian science model, and then I'll talk about what can be done. Briefly, I'll look at the separate school system, looking at on-reserve schools, and then focus more on the public school system, as I think that's where more of us teach. And I will offer a brief summary at the end of the presentation. So the history of First Nations is really the effects of colonization. Since early contact, First Nations individuals have been forced onto reservations where diseases flourished and Aboriginal populations dropped. During the 19th and 20th century, attempts at assimilating First Nations students into North American culture only succeeded in extinguishing the students' own culture. The best example of this would be residential schools, and consequently, First Nations peoples are the most disadvantaged minority in North American education. So why is there a need to change how we teach Aboriginal students? When students see their ethnic identities represented in the curriculum, they see their cultural history is valued, which serves to promote students' sense of political efficacy. For example, their belief that participation in the nation's governance may make a difference for them. I think it's no surprise that graduation rates need to be improved. It's a BC statistic, but high school graduation rates are 53% for on-reserve students and 73% for those who attend off-reserve. Aboriginals are caught in a bind between assimilation and self-preservation. Many articles I read were rooted in the Paulo Freire ideologies. If you remember from reading Set B, we read Pedagogy of the Oppressed, teaching the oppressed to reach social justice. A quote from the Vancouver Sun, Aboriginal education is falling much further behind schooling offered to mainstream Canadians, and concludes that the federal and provincial governments, as well as First Nation band councils, are failing to do much about it. Current science curriculum are not aligned with cultural values and thus require Aboriginal students to cross a border from who they are at home to what they need for success in the classroom. And I think that we owe our students a little bit better than that, and I think that we can do better as teachers. So just contrasting the Aboriginal ways of knowing versus traditional Euro-Canadian science. It's from Aikenhead article, which is from 1996. It seems like an older article, but it was referenced many times in the other research articles that I read, so I thought I'd stick with the original. Aboriginal and scientific knowledge differ in their social goals, the survival of a people versus the luxury of gaining knowledge for the sake of knowledge and for the power over nature and other people. They differ in their intellectual goals, to coexist with mystery in nature by celebrating mystery versus to eradicate mystery by explaining it away. They differ in their association with human action, intimately and subjectively interrelated versus formally and objectively decontextualized, and they differ in other ways as well. Holistic First Nations perspectives, with their gentle, accommodating, intuitive, and spiritual wisdom, versus reductionist Western science, with its aggressive, manipulative, mechanistic, and analytical explanations. So what can be done in the classroom? A lot of the research I did focused on reserve schools and linking back to that Freire idea that the people had to take power for themselves and make the change for themselves. For example, in the RICO article, it talked about the Maori communities of New Zealand creating their own school system that paralleled the government's public system based on their own culture, language, and philosophy. It's a proactive shift by the Maori people from waiting for things to be done for them to doing these things for themselves. And it's that inside out model of transformation. And we do see this happening in reserve schools. However, it hasn't been overly successful here in Canada. And for this presentation, I'm going to focus on the off-reserve schools so it's applicable to you guys as viewers. So Hampton and Roy offered 5 good strategies to create more positive classroom environments for First Nation students. And the number one thing they found was enhancing professor-student relationships. That is making those students feel like they have somebody on their side in their classroom, that you as their teacher are connected to them in a way other than just the established school relation to them. As well, including First Nations relevant content. We know that we have to do this, but it's really giving it a valuable place in your classroom rather than just having the token lesson that you can check off that box for. Using flexible teaching methods, adopting a more culturally appropriate teaching style, and gaining an understanding of the unique life of a First Nations student. The most important thing I think I learned throughout this presentation process was Monroe's idea about 21st century education. She really bridged the gap between the two different, between Aboriginal way of knowing and the traditional science model, and she said that we're really working towards the same thing. She suggested a holistic approach to education rather than stripping skills of context to promote holistic education. And it's the idea that students need to learn more than just tidbits of information and decontextualize skills, emphasizes creativity, critical thinking, collaboration, and communication. And she talked about how this is really the Indigenous way of knowing, but it's also the way that our education system is moving towards anyway, as students as creators of knowledge and not just passive learners, and having an appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things. The two-eyed seeing way was having Indigenous perspective with one eye, mainstream perspective with the other, and using both eyes together to bring something into focus, or that's the way that you view it. An example here for you from the research was for math class. The quill box example was an elder who explained the way that she measured a strip of wood to go around a box for these quill boxes that she made, and she took the diameter of the lid for the box, and she would do 3 times that plus the thumb length of wood, and that would go around the box every time. And we really see what's happening there is that they're calculating circumference using pi. And there are this and many other good examples of how to do this at showmeyourmath.ca, and I recommend you check that website out. For science class, I think a couple of the best examples that I've used of integrating First Nations content is the 7th generation paradigm. And it talks about, I have a reading that an elder presents, the idea that we live in a way now that 7 generations from now, um, our family will have the same resources that we did. And water systems, there's a website there you can check out as well about how we need to protect the land that we have given to us in that respect for Mother Nature. So in summary, moving towards decolonization requires extensive transformation of education where learning is rooted in Indigenous knowledges rather than treating these knowledges as an add-on or other way of knowing. So we talked about history and we established the reason why we need to change what we're doing. We talked about some different views of science and then the 21st century education that really blends the Aboriginal way of knowing with what Euro-Canadian science is and what we can do in the classroom. I had a few examples there for what you can do. Thank you for your time.